Oh, yes. Connor. Connor, are you there?
I am there, Mike. Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome, everybody. This is 372 pages that we'll never get back. We are doing a podcast book club of a book that we're pretty sure we're going to hate. That book is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, and this is our first real episode. We are diving in. They had their assignment, and hopefully they read it. Joining me as always, for the second time, is Michael J. Nelson. Mike, how you doing?
I'm good, yeah, and that qualifies as always. You're on the right track.
It's been a 100% track record.
100%, yeah. I'm doing good. How are you? I think we talked in the last time. We did not know. It was a cliffhanger as to what we would think of this book. What are your initial thoughts, Connor, before we dive into the meat of it?
Sure. We'll get to why we think these. But my initial thoughts were, I read the introduction, which sort of sets up the treasure hunt. But I was reading the first two chapters, and I was like, I hope that we have enough to work with here, because I was sort of intrigued by the way he sets up the treasure hunt, and I was hoping that the impression I had of it sort of being more littered with throwaway pop culture references and stuff was going to come into play. And then very quickly it became apparent that we had made the right decision. There's a scene where everything sort of fell into place, and I was like, we're going to have a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, there were unexpected delights. This is a little bit like I don't want to go as far as to say like the Roadhouse of a bad book, but the just like almost every sentence as I was doing the notes for it, I really had to restrain myself. Like I'm a pretty fast typist, so like recopying paragraphs of him was, I had to stop my own hand. Like, dear God, did you read this paragraph?
Exactly.
So,
at some point,
yeah.
It became there was going to be a lot of stuff to discuss, and I don't know how long this is going to take us to get through the first only 3 chapters. So I sort of just had to highlight the highlights of my highlights in order to sort of narrow it down.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I think it's important for people. I brought this up with you, Connor. You agreed this is a good idea. We sort of touched on it a little bit in episode 0 or whatever we're calling that, the preview to it of, what have we read, but we really didn't get into what do we like. And so
Sure.
I think it's, you know how you read a critic for a number of years, or maybe just you read a couple of reviews of a critic, and you don't get his overall take on the world. You only get his close-up view of the movies or whatever, or the books that he or she is reviewing. And then later it's revealed that, he's like a Harley guy who likes it's just something about his own taste calibrates it to yours, and you go, oh, I never have to read that guy again because I know X, Y, or Z.
Right.
And
he slips in a reference to the Cabal of Lizard People in his review of
exactly.
Minions 3. So
Right. So in order to dispense with that and to have the audience out there calibrate their tastes with us, and we, no matter what you hear in this thing, continue to listen, but at least then you'll know whether to dismiss certain things based on what you say. So I accidentally gave you a preview of the theme song for that, and so now I'll play it for real. And this is our department called Who Do You Love? And Connor, we're going to do you first, and maybe in this second episode we can talk about my tastes and proclivities. But
Sure.
Here we go. This is a department called Who Do You Love? Oh, and the song is called Who Do You Love, too. Well, that kind of worked out well.
Well done. I'm surprised by that, despite having heard it 2 minutes earlier unexpectedly.
Yeah. Sort of spoiled the surprise of, was this going to be the George Thorogood Who Do You Love?
Right.
No, I was trying to go for an 80s vibe. So, all right. Connor, here's the questions. Are you ready? Who do you love?
Yes.
Meatloaf, the food. Where do you stand?
So when I see meatloaf on a menu, I'm often tempted by it. And this is usually at places where the meatloaf is shockingly expensive. And the thing that always intrigues me about meatloaf is that it's usually like on Tuesdays only. Like that's a special item where for some reason, I guess they have to make the whole loaf. You're not just making a slice of it. That is something that is rarely available. And that usually draws in my focus to that menu item.
My takeaway from that is that you go to expensive places that have meatloaf on the menu. I want a list of the places you go.
There's ones that have, like bison meatloaf. I got meatloaf the last time we were in Nashville. We went to Arnold's and it was only available on Wednesdays or whenever we went there. So I got the meatloaf with a really good gravy on top of it. It was delicious.
Okay, so it draws you in. So meatloaf, yes, for you.
Absolutely.
All right, folks at home, calibrate that. Meatloaf, the sweaty guy. Where do you stand on him?
That's another one that I'm in favor of.
All right.
I listen to Bad Outta Hell, and I enjoy the experience of it. I have a vinyl copy of it, and I put on. I could tell you what my favorite songs are. That I could probably rank them in order. I like.
And he's going to do it, everyone.
I mean, Paradise by the Dashboard Light drew me in. At first, I thought that was sort of a, it sounds like a song from Grease, which I've never seen, but I expect that's what Grease songs sound like. But you learn to sing along with it and stuff like that. Bad Outta Hell is a great album opener. And the album Closer, which the name's escaping me right now, but it's about 9 minutes long, and it builds. Just every single minute, you think it couldn't get any more bombastic, but it continues to build. It is just insane. Oh, it's for crying out loud. By the end, they're just like launching off missiles from the stage, and they've pulled out cannons for the 1812 Overture. So I'm a fan. It's ridiculous, but that's what I like about it.
I guess we should go back and you have the LP of it. How many grams is that?
It's an actual one that was probably in a 99-cent bin because it sold 17 million copies. So it was next to the Poco records and stuff like that. So it's not a reissue where it's been pressed in weighs as much as a car tire, but
sure, and an oxygen-free sleeve or whatever.
Right.
Okay. All right. So keep calibrating. That's 2 data points for Conor. Sports talk radio. Where do you stand on that, Conor?
That's a step that I can't really go any further.
Okay.
I do like a lot of sports. I have my Twitter feed homepage. When I open up my Twitter app, is a column for just people who talk about the Washington Nationals.
Yeah.
So I like that aspect of it. I think they offer some good insights into the team, something that I don't pick up on, something that the beat writers might not talk about. Sports talk radio is something that I've never gotten into, though. It seems to conform to every single stereotype you would have about it, of just blowhards calling in and yelling at each other.
All right. Well, I don't think we lost any audience members there, but I just wanted to make sure. Oh, I should point out, by the way, that every test like this has an anchor on it. Scientifically, you should have like a thing that everyone universally agrees that is awful. And so somewhere on this list, there is that thing. And I'm not going to tell you what it is until the end of the test. But that's so you can calibrate whether your tastes are,
the control, so they can tell if you cheated on the personality
right.
test.
It's not a computer doing this. Songbirds. Where do you stand on songbirds?
Oh, man.
Wow, this shouldn't be a hard question.
Sure. Songbirds are great. Okay. Where I'm curious, though, is whether a mockingbird qualifies as a songbird.
I was kind of leading to that with some of my secret knowledge of you, but go ahead.
I've got a strong distaste to mockingbirds. There used to be one that lived in our backyard, and mockingbirds, some of you might know this. Many of you probably only know mockingbirds from the idea that it's a sin to kill one of them. And that is an outdated notion, my friends, because
oh dear,
something that mockingbirds do is they are nocturnal, and they will be out your window. And in urban settings, like in San Diego, the most thing that they've learned to imitate is a car alarm. So a mockingbird will be out there just doing these calls that at 3 a.m. And I have ventured outside. They lived in the bamboo outside my house to shake the bamboo in order to get them to vacate the premises. So. Songbirds are fine unless they include that subset.
I love the thought of you in like a nightcap and I like to think like a white old-timey robe, shaking the bamboo and shaking your fist at the mockingbird up in the tree.
Pretty much that. I arose and heard such a clatter.
All right, let's move on. Amanda Seyfried. Where do you stand on Amanda Seyfried, the actress, the large-eyed actress? I can name a number of her movies, but I think everybody knows who she is. Where do you stand?
I just spit taked my polar as you said that name. That is not a name I've heard in a while. So I have a early on when she was sort of making the rounds. I think I had a sort of comic distaste for her where it sort of got exaggerated because I just didn't understand why she was sort of popping up in these roles where we were supposed to look at her and be smitten, I guess. So I thought that her you don't need to discuss people's appearance. She didn't strike me as a typical Hollywood babe, and so I was sort of like it became an exaggerated thing where we would show a ogre in an orc in Lord of the Rings pop up, and the joke would be, "Oh, Amanda Seyfried." So I'm not a fan. She doesn't seem to be popping up as much.
Yeah, you don't have much to worry about anymore. But okay, so there's another data point. Amanda Seyfried is a thumbs down. There's only a few more of these people. We're not going to belabor this. Every single Marvel Comics movie, you have to take them as a single group, pass, fail. You can't point them out. Just yes or no to Marvel movies.
No, I say no. I don't go to see them. I see them when we do them. If I'm on a plane and there's an option, I'll probably watch the latest dumb Seth Rogen comedy before I would watch that. They don't strike my fancy. I liked comics when I was in middle school, but they all sort of seem kind of similar to me.
Okay, that I think gives a huge data point to the audience. Now, these next three I'm just going to rattle off because these are my wife, Bridget, and I have, this is our triumvirate of we will not be friends with someone who doesn't enjoy at least one of these three things.
Oh boy.
It's just, I'm sorry to say it. It's very, very shallow of us, but that's how we work. Coffee, alcohol, spicy foods.
I'm 3 for 3. Pro.
All right. I knew that. I just wanted people to know. And finally, the spin doctors. Where do you stand on that?
I am not a Spin Doctors fan. They were sort of in the wheelhouse where people my age in middle school would have had a Spin Doctors album because you really didn't know any better. They got played on the radio after Pearl Jam, after Nirvana, and we're on Saturday Night Live, so you probably didn't know any better. And those are still in the 99-cent bin, probably next to the Meatloaf albums these days. But I'm not a fan. I don't think that's a difficult position to justify.
Okay. Hey, you found the anchor. That is the anchor for that test. So there you go, people at home. Calibrate now as we work through this book. You now know what Conor likes. And maybe next episode we'll find out what I like. But let's dig in.
Let's do it. So I think that the where it all starts is sort of this framing device of 80s pop culture, where the introduction sets up the treasure hunt that Halliday is conducting, and it's under the framing device that the 80s were the happiest time of his life, and so the characters and tropes and works of art, for better or for worse, of 1980s pop culture are going to be the keystones to this treasure hunt that he's running.
Yeah, I think he says it. I think that because he says it roughly 4,000 times in the first 6 pages. So right. There is no doubt as to where this is going.
But so what struck me about that is this book has been called in the trailer for the movie. It's been called the pop culture holy grail, I think was the phrasing.
Oh boy.
Or the holy grail of pop culture.
Sure.
And so my impression was that the 80s pop culture was a very loose framing device for sort of just throwing a bunch of popular shit at the wall and incorporating stuff into there.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is that it's not necessarily the 80s. It's like just bad stuff or something. I don't know. Like it.
Well, so what struck me is that he at some point in time he calls the protagonist Wade. He calls his hideout my fortress of solitude, my bat cave.
Yes.
And my reaction was just sort of Superman and Batman, the 80s. Those popular entities that we associate with that decade and no decade other than that. And sure, Superman had several movies in the 80s. The Tim Burton Batman came out in 89, but those are not your go-to things when you think about 80s pop culture.
Yeah, I mean, just as 2 examples, when at Riff Tracks we have available to us, we did one whole series of Batmans that were
sure,
but they were in the 40s, and then they were remade, I believe, in the 50s, right? And then of course the 60s.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean every decade is thoroughly covered by Batman and Superman.
So yeah, then he mentions he has a Star Trek lunchbox, and Star Trek. Sure, it probably had movies in the 80s, but he mentions he scans the lunchroom looking for new friends like a T-1000, which is from Terminator 2, which came out in 1991. So it's a very vague interpretation.
It's a loose framing device. Yeah.
But then again, he says he refers to the 80s, and he sort of expects us to know what he's talking about. And this was something that I took note of immediately. So he's talking about Halliday's video that announced his treasure hunt, and he has this description. I'm gonna read a paragraph.
Please.
Halliday is at a high school dance being held in a large gymnasium. He's surrounded by teenagers whose clothing, hairstyles, and dance moves all indicate that this time period is the late 80s.
Oh, dear God. That is a terrible sentence.
One more. Grinning maniacally, he spins in rapid circles, swinging his arms and head in time with the song, flawlessly cycling through several signature 80s dance moves. And so what struck me is he just sort of says, so yeah, it's the 80s, and whatever you're imagining, that's what it's like.
Describing stuff is hard. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Just call it that.
So what I wanted to see, I'm going to spring this on you now, but I wanted to see, like, give you 30 seconds, and I want to see if you want to describe what people could look like in the 80s, clothing, hairstyles, dance moves. Let's see how many descriptors we could come up with in that period of time. Let's just go back and forth, and I'll count you down. You start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Are you talking about any kind of clothing style or thing that I can name?
Or what he could have said to identify that.
Oh yeah, big-shouldered coats.
Sure, or a sort of parted down along on one side, flock of seagulls do.
Yeah, ducktail, like the '60s revisited greaseback pompadour.
Yeah, or a pair of Air Jordan classic high top sneakers.
Some sharp shoes, like pointy-toed shoes, greaser style kind of.
You could do the Madonna sort of bow in the hair, and then the sort of fishnet gloves that she would wear.
Yeah, or multiple leotards going to a dance, aerobics exercise or something like that.
Right, or big, Mr. T or Eric B. and Rakim styles with gold chains. That's about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And those were off the top of our head. So I thought that description was kind of funny. It was just sort of like, 80s night when your local bar or fraternity party does 80s night, it's like that.
Right. It's like in if you open up the any of the screenwriting textbooks, which tell you do not put in descriptors of like, Joe came towards me. He was a guy who looked like another guy. Like, don't do that. Don't do the shortcuts. It's up to somebody else to decide what he looks like. And he broke this rule many, many times.
And so that's part of James Halliday, his video, and so he's an interesting character. And my interpretation of him was that he's like a Steve Jobs with Mark Zuckerberg with Howard Hughes, but he's sort of this, I guess it's sort of like this nerd fantasy of one of us attaining to those guys' level.
Yeah, he doesn't, the writer doesn't seem to have the grasp of what it might actually be like to be that guy. And so it is a very cartoon. It's like he cut out a cardboard thing. Like, I thought one of the analogs might be did you see, was it called Deus Ex Machina, the recent,
I didn't.
Within the last 3 years. There is a character like that. He's a reclusive, billionaire who builds robots or something out in the wilderness. And that was done about as subtly as you could do. It was still, for my taste, a little cartoony, but this amps it up to so high. And he also is pulling in disparate elements where I couldn't actually get the picture of him. I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, like, oh yeah, I see this guy. But it kept sort of changing a little bit where you can't really nail down, who are you talking about? Just the way you describe stuff, just say who it is.
Well, sure. And it's sort of, he was showing him at different times in his life. So in the video, it seemed like he was being portrayed as like a 6-year-old in his parents' basement, which was a very jarring image.
Yeah. You got what he was doing, but it was a very, very clumsy setup, I thought.
And I think it's just such a weird thing to assume that it's just, it is sort of like being a lottery winner, where if you're a guy who sits in his room and plays video games for 12 hours a day, just to assume that you would be still doing that if you had billions of dollars, without taking into account the drive, the dedication, the responsibility that sort of comes on the way to attaining that money.
Right, which is, I thought, was telling that his whole framing thing is, then you do the thing that you're doing leads to riches at the end. Like, I'm just going to find the Easter egg and then I will be happy and everything. Like, right. There's no thought of actually working or attaining anything or changing the horrible life that he keeps describing. It's all just like finding a thing and then everything will be good and I'll keep doing the same thing I'm doing right now.
Right. And so I had questions about the sort of world that they're living in, because things have obviously changed. There's references to bombs falling and the, it is seemingly dystopian, but I guess the system of capitalism is still very much in play, since this guy has billions of dollars that he's leaving to you, and that will make a big difference in your life?
Yeah, it seems to be. He doesn't describe it as being very wobbly because, as I noted, he was in the stacks, right?
Yeah.
Which we can go into later. But he talks about the electric cars driving into town, bringing goods and workers. Yes. So there are goods being transported back and forth.
Yeah, and that was a sentence that stood out to me as well. It was a very interesting way to describe the process of commerce. It echoed to me a very famous Simpsons line where it's meant to be funny, but Homer's brain informs him that money can be exchanged for goods and services, which
that's probably where he got the line. Now that
it could be, it's sort of part of the language these days, but.
If he had watched more 80s Westerns, he would have been talking about dry goods being transported.
And so you mentioned something to me that was that this you feel that this might have been even fed through software that exists. This is something that Lauren has used at her job, my wife, to get something to a certain level of readability, like a certain grade level.
Right.
And so that's your theory, is that this has been sort of gone through a process like that.
Yeah, it just feels like no phrase or sentence rises above about a third grade reading level. I mean, I don't mean to be insulting to the guy. No, but maybe that's what happened. Maybe he was using, I mean, aside from the references themselves, which I think it's impossible for any reading software. I think they're all pretty crude, as I'm sure Lauren could tell you. They just kind of do word length and things like that.
Right, but, sentence length and
it struck me as very, very simple sentences. Well,
it was a really interesting thing to think about, because I think that a lot of people probably don't think about how much, works of art, entertainment that a company thinks is going to be worth potentially millions and millions of dollars is subject to this kind of thing. And so I never really thought about the fact that this might be something happening with books, but it makes a lot of sense. It's sort of like a Dan Brown book has a very similar feel to me in terms of the what I thought was bad writing, but it could just be for this is going to need to appeal to as many people as possible. It's going to need to be translatable. And I think that's, that sort of happens in movies. We know that they craft it to appeal to Asian markets and stuff like that. I was shocked the one time that I took two Lady Gaga songs and laid them over top each other, and they were, produced to, beats literally came in at the same thing. There were breakdowns at the same point in time. So I think that's something we just sort of don't assume is happening, but it clearly is.
Yeah, it's the, the fast food. We know that it's calibrated for the exact amount of crunch, salt, fat, whatever that golden triangle is. And this book is apparently the same deal. It's going to translate to a lot of people based on his very, very simple prose. And he's a huge lover of cliches. I mean, it is one cliche after another, little phrases and things. Like goods and services.
Right.
There's just, the book is littered with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, one of the sentences that stood out to me was when Halliday, referring to the Atari 2600 game Adventure, called it one of the coolest video gaming experiences of my life. And he also later wrote it's one of the what do you call it, the epigraph to the book starting. Being human totally sucks most of the time. video games are the only thing that makes life bearable. And I just wrote down, a billionaire wrote that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and he returns to that theme time and time again. I started putting them down and then I just stopped. It's almost every other paragraph where he says, the world sucks, but in video games I can be whoever. I mean, the repetitiveness of that is sort of shocking. It's nearly every paragraph.
Right, and it's an opinion that I'm sure a lot of people hold, and you don't want to tell people what to do with their time. I mean, I like video games. I know that you enjoy playing video games too. It's just it's not something that we've ever lost ourselves into the point where, they're the only thing that makes life bearable.
Yeah. And so that is the theme. And then he is, we probably have to talk about this. Sorry. I'm looking at the notes. So that's my stutter there. His atheism screed. I know you have some thoughts about that, and I do too, but why don't you go ahead on that?
So yeah, that was something that, so this happens in chapter 2. He's sort of describing his life in the stacks and sort of setting up his worldview. And then sort of out of nowhere comes a page and a half of what I wrote down the term performative atheism. Yeah. Which was sort of just, it was just clearly sort of the author's views being projected through this character. It felt wildly out of place to me. It was really, really weird to sort of be like, all right, Star Wars reference. The stacks look like the levels in Donkey Kong. By the way, folks, I've cracked the code and there's no God.
Yeah. And he does it. It's the style that he does it. He says, I wish someone had told me. And then he puts it in quotes as though the person is telling him that's the thing. And then it goes on for like a page and a half. And it struck me really as like a 6th grader telling a 3rd grader what's going down on the playground. Like, look, man, nobody's going to tell you this but me. I mean, it's really, really childish. He, just as one example, he refers to, there's no dude in the sky called God, like, dude, come on.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And his name is not God. He is God. It's like saying a guy named human. And then his arguments against it are just like the worst, like, sophomore level in, high school, the thing that you think of when you don't want to go to church. It's just awful.
Right. Yeah. And we had seen something, I don't want to talk about the guy who wrote this too much just because I'm sure he's very nice, but we saw a spoken word piece that he had done on YouTube that was sort of, it was how you knew that this is a stand-in for him, because it was sort of about monkeys, and it had some of the same themes, like a bunch of monkeys are walking around and then one monkey says to the other monkey, hey, like there's a guy in the sky. And so I think that it was, if there were any doubts that this is a stand-in for the author, this is something that I think clears it all up. And maybe it comes up later. Maybe this has a big payoff in about 150 pages, but it sort of seems to me just like it was a dog whistle to the other gamers who are going to be reading this, the guys who are like, oh, you don't believe in God, and yet you call it Thursday? Because Thor is named after. It's like, so that's what it seemed like to me, is sort of an endearing thing. And I have to assume that if it doesn't pay off, an editor had to have been like, you got to take this out. This has no place in your little video game book, but maybe.
That'll be intriguing to see, because if there had been an editor working on this, I'm just not sure about this whole editor theory of yours. But we'll see.
An interesting thing is that, the other book that I was really shocked when it had very similar out of nowhere atheism screeds in it.
What's that?
Shoeless Joe. It's the book that Field of Dreams is based on.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
It's just, Field of Dreams is a good, warm-hearted movie about second chances and stuff like that. And in the book, his wife's family is very religious. So the character's Ray's family is very religious. So he just, every 50 pages, he finds a way to work in some screed like that. It's really weird.
Yeah. I feel that there are more coming from this guy. But he, just quickly, he does the woman, Mrs. Gilmore. Do we want to get into Mrs. Gilmore?
Sure. Yeah, why not? That's because that's who he talks to it about. He feels sorry for her because she doesn't know that he thinks organized religion is a total crock.
Exactly. That was the sentence that So after a page and a half of this, just vitriolic screed against religion, he says the very line is exactly what you said. I didn't have the heart to tell her that organized religion was a total crock. So now he's only against organized religion. It's any other religion. If you're a free-floating believer, I got no beef with you. It's when you start to organize. So
right, versus drawing the line, Heaven's Gate. There's like, well, they're not super organized,
right.
I guess. They're sort of making it up as they go.
It's very scattershot. So I'm all on board with those guys. But then, but Mrs. G, like, he doesn't have the heart to tell her, like, you know what? I'm guessing Mrs. G, as terrible a character as she is, probably knows and doesn't really care that you don't.
Right.
She's probably aware.
She's seen society fall to pieces in her lifetime. So I think she's probably seen a lot more than you have, 17-year-old fat kid.
Right. Anyway, that cracked me up.
Something else that struck me as just kind of funny. This was a very one-off line, but it seems like the kind of thing we'd hang a lot of mileage on if there was we did this at Riff Tracks. But it ends the introduction. He says that dozens of books, cartoons, movies, and miniseries have attempted to tell the story of everything that happened. And I for one was impressed that the format of the miniseries, after sort of dying out in the mid '90s, I feel like makes a comeback in 2040 after things have fallen to pieces.
After the collapse of society, It was one of the things that kept everyone together. When was the last miniseries that you could even? When did they call that?
The Stand in the '90s, or the really bad The Shining they made. They made a couple about decades, like the '60s, but I think really I don't know the last thing that I've heard that term tossed around.
Yeah. Well, I will jump over then to the other phrase that struck me is obviously something that he just read or is trying to cram in, is that the ant who takes him in, the harpy in a house coat.
Oh, sure.
Housecoat. look, teenager, really? Housecoat? Who has ever seen or known anyone who has a housecoat out of a book describing a terrible woman, clutching a bottle of scotch with a bad hairdo, with rollers in her hair? That's the only time anyone's ever heard of a housecoat. And he's using it in 2040 to describe this woman.
Who is essentially, like Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge from James and the Giant Peach sort of combined into one, just or Harry Potter's aunt type of thing, that trope. I was intrigued by her boyfriend, though, who seemed like kind of a cool guy.
Yes.
He's just banging the old lady, walking around without his shirt so he can show his prison tattoos, stealing kids' computers. I'd like to see more about him.
Now get out of here, because we're going to take that house coat off, watch a miniseries, and really get down to it.
Another turn of phrase that I enjoyed was, so his name is Wade Watts, which his dad or his mom told him that his dad named after a, sort of Peter Parker, Reed Richards, Stan Lee kind of superhero kind of thing. And he says, knowing that about my dad made me think he must have been a cool guy, despite how he died. And he died looting a liquor store during a blackout, or I guess looting a grocery store. But still, it's like, I want people to give me that sort of level of benefit of the doubt,
Right.
Like, yeah, he got caught, jacking it in a theater, but hey, he sort of liked comic books enough to set my life on that course. So
seemed like a pretty straight up guy, except for that one mistake.
Right. So I think that the next thing that I had sort of flagged was the experience of VR, which is going to play a prime role here. And
right.
He hooks into this Oasis system, which is, seems like a fairly standard advanced VR system.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me immediately think like how difficult a computer operating system is to portray in entertainment. Like,
yeah, in
we all
any
use
form.
Computers every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
But whether it's movies, we always see that. We've seen that a ton of times, be it the net, pizza.net, showing up on the screen as a way to order pizza, or just anytime a character is hacking into something, they're always using these wildly unrealistic computer OSs. And it's jarring to the point that, if they used, it's like a product placement where it's like, oh, if they showed a pair of Nike shoes, that would be weird. But if they show a pair of Nike shoes, you're like, oh, well, that's even more jarring to the point of taking me out of the moment.
Yeah, it's when it would be like showing someone getting a box of Kleenex or something, but then the Kleenex were a black cloth that rubbed soot on your face. You'd be like, wait, we all know what that is.
It's
very jarring. Like, we experience it all the time, and then you're showing us something different. How are we supposed to suspend our disbelief or even enter into this world when it doesn't make any sense?
Right. And so this is the way that this is sort of set up for me, at least. Like, I was already sort of thinking about, and I assume when they make this into a movie, most of this probably takes place in the computer world. So they'll probably just have different actors playing this. Who knows? Who cares? But I just think it was clearly sort of written with an eventual movie being what they were going for. For example, he gets into high school and he sort of talks about how he just starts walking his character down the hallway, which it's not going to be how this works.
Yeah, this makes no sense. He's going to school, but he has to climb into an avatar and go to school. Like, people understand what like homeschooling would look like without crawling into a weird avatar and then like walking down the halls of the school, and he gets bullied, or he bullies someone, or he has some sort of a standoff with like a guy in his avatar. What
bullying has changed very little since the movies of the 1980s. I would have you know.
They could eliminate bullying if they just didn't have hallways filled with avatars, and just get into the classroom and start learning what you need to learn.
And he makes the point that, you can mute all these people, but he runs into this bully, Todd 13, and he's like, oh, he's one of these jerks from my algebra class. It's like, why is he not already muted at this point in time? Like, we've all had interactions. Like, it takes, if someone calls you a dick on Twitter, the act to never interact with that person again involves like 1.5 seconds. You would do that to everyone who was ever mean to you, right, or who had ever looked at you the wrong way. And it wouldn't have even got to that point. I'm sorry. It's a strange. Just you have to do that in order to make it familiar, but the details make it that much less realistic to me.
Well, Conor, I hate to take issue with you, but I have an example here that will pull you into, because you said that it's really hard to portray it. This is the end, I believe, of chapter 2. His friend pings him while he's waiting to go to school at Virtua School, whatever the hell they call it. And he pings him like, "What's up, brah?" or something like that. He's like, this is the quote, "I closed the IM window, tapped a small door icon at the edge of my display, then selected Ake's chat room from my list of favorites." End of chapter. So I think he pretty vividly describes what it's like to go into a chat room. He clicked on the door icon at the side of his screen. Dear God.
It's a page turner in the sense that you do have to turn the page in order to access the rest of the information. I was impressed by, just above that, how much more improved the grammar of chatting in 2040 has come along. They're talking in complete sentences. They're capitalizing. I mean, we chat every day as everyone does with coworkers, and ours has degenerated into just lower caps, ha ha ha. Okay, like there's no formality to this. But these are 17-year-olds talking in complete sentences to each other. Yeah,
well, I guess that's what they teach in Virtua School. Do not use LOL with someone. That's rude, Sure. As society collapses totally, and we live in stacks of trailer homes that collapse on each other, and we all die in huge fires of mobile homes and everything. Still, right. Please don't use LOL.
As you're sneaking out of the stacks in order to, he actually says this, to not get raped by a pedophile, which is something that I was extremely jarring. It's like, is this happening? Is this going to have a payoff in 150 pages? Because that would be awful.
I touched on it as I pronounced it, and I just want to get it out of the way. What do we do with these names? Because he's got the misspelled, not misspelled, but just sort of unpronounceable names.
Yeah. It's,
how do you deal with that? And we're going to have to deal with it a lot, I guess. I mean, Aunt Alice is fine, and Mrs. Gilmore, I can handle that. Mrs. G, sorry. But Artemis with a 3 as the E, I guess that's just Artemis, right?
I guess so. and there's sucks orbs, noobs. We'll get to them later, but there's IROC.
IROC spelled with a 0 and a hyphen, but capital AECH. How are you pronouncing that in your head?
I went straight to ache. I guess this opens the door for horrible debates like GIF versus GIF as we're doing this. But
why do you do that to your reading audience? I just don't get, because CH could be a hard K or it could be a soft CH. The AE could be It's
like goatee hook, where it's actually pronounced fish.
Right. So this could be, ack, like Kathy. It could be each. It could be ache, like you do. Eck. Could be eck. I just think that's a terrible thing to make, just to struggle and trip on that when it's so easy to would you just give him a name, please?
Right. I pronounced FAQ as FAC the other day by accident, and Lauren nearly threw me out of the apartment.
Oh, that's acceptable, isn't it?
I
have to spell out FAQ?
I sort of interchanged them. I think I made the switch consciously to FAQ, but we don't need to get into this.
Yes, as you know, I'm a strong GIF guy, by the way.
Yeah, it's obviously, don't listen to this if you're on the other side of that discussion. But let's talk about Artemis, and by that discussion, we can discuss our hero as well. So Artemis is someone, a blogger that he is in love with.
Yes.
That he's reading her story, and she's the manic pixie dream girl of this story, the Zooey Deschanel character, it seems like.
Yeah, and so she runs a blog where she talks about he loves her so much, has a huge nerd crush. I believe that's an actual quote from the book.
Okay, nice.
Has a nerd crush on her because she writes things called like John Hughes Blues, and then she divides John Hughes movies of the 80s into 3 distinct categories. And then he says, and her humor was sharp and witty and sarcastic. But again, no examples of it.
An online writer who's doing that, you say? Oh, right. Yeah, sure. Just
think of someone who might be sarcastic, blah, blah, blah. But so, yeah, tell them about why he has a nerd crush, her description of her avatar.
Yeah, so she's well, first he sort of describes what she's not. And this is the sort of, you have this trope of people who are dismissing conventionally attractive people by means, dismissing them as unattractive to build up someone who is conventionally unattractive. So he says the absurdly thin yet wildly popular supermodel frame, or the top-heavy wasp-waisted porn starlet physique. And then he puts in parentheses, this is, again, the author speaking, which looked even less natural in the Oasis than it did in the real world. Yeah, so take that, people that are attractive in conventional ways that earn them money.
Yeah, it's it sounds sadly like sad guys in bars who obviously aren't killing it with the women, like smoking and gaining weight and going like, that chick over there, she's not super hot, but I'd do her a favor, that kind of thing. Like, come on, man.
So, but Artemis's frame was short and Rubenesque, all curves. So this is a 17-year-old tossing around Rubenesque.
That's not conventionally attractive, I guess. All curves. Oh, yuck. That's not very conventional.
But she has big hazel eyes, rounded cheekbones, a pointy chin, and a perpetual smirk. I found her unbearably attractive. So that got me thinking, like, so this guy's jacking it to Artemis. This is something that's not really
100%.
Gone into in this world. He touches on sex. His mom's a phone sex operator, but VR is going to be a very sex-fueled world, and so far it just has sort of been hinted at, but that's got to be the primary use of this software, I would imagine.
Yeah, and the fact that his only description, he has a nerd crush, but then every other thing about it's like, please admit that obviously. And he says that he downloads her avatar. That was another thing that struck me. He goes, I sometimes would she would upload photos of her avatar, and I would download them sometimes. And then he had in parentheses, always, which I found repulsive. But like, right. Why would you need, she's uploading photos of her avatar? And so he's downloading them, he said, to my hard drive. I didn't. If she's got an avatar, isn't that fully available all the time? Or
Sure, I guess you might be worried that it's going to, go offline, that she'll block you, that some of those things might be rendered inaccessible to you. But yeah, that doesn't make any sense. We all know how things work like this. An Instagram account is not something you have to save on your own unless you're incredibly creepy.
Right. Now, you breezed over it. I'd like to go back to this. This is the word-for-word description of Artemis. So try to put this, I'm asking the listener right now, close your eyes and imagine this person. Raven hair, big hazel eyes. He doesn't say how big. It's up to you. Rounded cheekbones, a pointy chin, and a perpetual smirk. I thought, is this like Laurence Olivier as Richard III? Like, what is going on with this person? This does not in any way sound attractive. Can you put that together in your head as a thing?
It would be a fun thing for a police sketch artist to do, especially when you factor in the short and Rubenesque all-curved frame.
With a pointy chin. My God, this is like a cartoon witch. I have no idea what's going on with this. But anyway,
that sounds sort of like it's that's sort of a Sims make your own character type of thing, I guess.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of any person with a pointy chin outside of witches and villains, and I can't do it. But if you can, more power to you.
Let us know, or send us your Artemis fan art because we would love to see it. Someone I would not like to see fan art is our protagonist Wade Watts, because when he starts describing himself, and he's unappealing because he's a nerd, obviously, but he's almost unappealing to the point of revulsion, where it's like we're supposed to be. He's like we're supposed to be sympathetic to this guy. He's just this sort of he describes himself as overweight, despite the fact that we're in some sort of government issuing rations type of thing. So the fact that people are still getting overweight is a impressive feat.
Yeah, I was very jarred by the fact that he describes his aunt as an undernourished harpy in a housecoat. And then like a paragraph before he said, but I wasn't doing too bad. I had more than I could possibly eat or something like that. I was like, well, why aren't you sharing it with your aunt? So your aunt is like dumping all the food into the laundry room and walking away and starving.
Right. So yeah, I thought that was a funny thing that both of these people are sort of, one is wildly conventionally unattractive, but the other woman is super unattractive. So that's just another fun thing for the gamers out there to, this could be you type of thing.
Yeah. Well, put that in your mind's eye along with Artemis. Imagine Wade. I'd love to see fan art of them all.
He's stuck on his own planet. That was something that struck me, is that these planets in the Oasis require you to pay to get off of them, I guess. So I wrote down as he's describing that, it's like, this character Skook Lightwalker, who's just longing for an adventure, and if only he could get off this planet where he's stuck with his aunt, would be quite a journey.
Wow. We're probably getting in the weeds here, and
yes,
maybe we should start wrapping up. But there's a couple things we have to talk about, right?
Yes, we have to discuss the basement, because that's when it all clicked for me. We had not made a mistake. That's when I realized that this was going to deliver on the promise of that list of things that sort of piqued my interest from the beginning, that viral tweet.
Yeah, it plunges you. It's like suddenly being grabbed and just thrown into the pool. I mean, every sentence is just packed with things that will, depending on your perspective, either make you toss the book across the room. I read less than a paragraph to my wife, who was sitting around having a little bit of coffee this morning, enjoying life. And I said, just 1 second. Here's what we're up against. And I read a paragraph, and she basically just went, "Oh, mother of God, please leave me alone." Right. She was shocked. So, it's a whole chapter of that.
Yeah. So they go down into the basement, which is the chat room where his friend, I guess pretty much his best friend, only friend, has sort of set up this hangout for people. And they just start broing down, Mike. They start doing what dudes do when they get in with each other, what Gunters do. They start talking about, they start besting each other with naming facts about random stuff from the 80s.
Yep, and then when a noob tries to horn in, like someone like iRock, oh man, what happens? So, the sparks fly.
This is what I highlighted. I wanna just read IROC's entrance because it is really, really something special. So they're having this discussion. It's just the guys, Ake and our hero are talking about like a Ewok direct-to-TV movie, and they're just sort of besting each other, knowing about the director. They start talking about Lady Hawk.
Oh God, yeah, that was punishing.
They just go back and forth saying, facts about it, arguing about the director. They, at some point in time, quote, "Airplane, surely you can't be serious," which I wrote a low point next to. I just thought that was...
yeah, that's not acceptable.
I just sort of stared at it. And then at the end of that, they say, "Our arguments were often high in entertainment value."
I did not highlight that. I must have skipped over that.
So the crowd is watching this happen, but then IROC enters, and so IROC's the way he introduces himself. "Are you cocks arguing about Star Wars again?" And so when you think of all the great character introductions in the history of entertainment, you imagine Humphrey Bogart turning around in his bar in Casablanca, or Indiana Jones is back after he whips the guy, type of thing. I just think that we got a new contender here. Yeah. Are you cocks arguing about Star Wars again? It's too perfect.
It's spectacular. And in this, I highlighted the introduction of I guess we'll call him Ake. Is that what you're calling him?
Sure.
As I walked over, he glanced up from the Intellivision game he was playing. I don't know how you get past a sentence like that, but then the next sentence, I don't have it written down, but it's something about his trademark Cheshire grin stretched from ear to ear. Like,
that 80s character.
That's, first of all, physically repulsive yet again, that his smile actually goes from ear to ear. And the Cheshire reference, like, what is he plucking from here? I don't understand it.
But this is, seemingly a daily interaction too. So every day, Wade walks in and Ake grins at him like a Cheshire cat while playing an Intellivision game, which a television and Atari 2600 games are unplayable to anyone who's played a video game that came after them. But these kids who were born in 2030 are finding entertainment value in them somehow.
That's what makes it cool, man. Nobody else gets it, but they do.
So when IROC enters, again, IROC is someone who he loathes and has not chosen to utilize the handy mute feature in the Oasis.
Yeah, and he introduces him by saying, no, actually, I take that back. He doesn't introduce him. He does a whole dialogue with IROC, and IROC is doing stuff like, you cocks talking about Star Wars, and then a couple paragraphs later, we like to argue about stuff like this, but IROC was bad at it. So I was like, oh, thank you. I hadn't gleaned that from the page and a half.
So you would say his arguments were not often high in entertainment value.
Conor, I would say that not only is IROC and these are all quotes now, a crap burger, I'd say the movies that he likes are sap fests, and he's a suck ass and a lamer. So
he's not an elite gunter with some serious mental kung fu.
No, sir.
If we could just pause for 1 second, because I want to finalize IROC, but gunter is going to be a word we're going to come across a lot.
Yeah, wow.
And it's unfortunate. And, so I didn't even know this was a term until we did a short at one of our shows recently where there was a big mascot raccoon.
Yeah.
And at some point in time after the show, a friend from Burlington emailed me and was like, my favorite part was when the raccoon bumped his gunt up against a little kid. And I was like, "What's gunt?" And so, Urban Dictionary to the rescue.
Oh no, yeah.
It is a term for, the protruding gut combined with a term we don't need to mention because my mom's probably listening to this. So, and it's been up there since 2002 on Urban Dictionary. It's got like 5,000 votes. So I assume that as far as gross slang terms go, it's well known. So it's sort of unfortunate. You can't just be forced, because you can't come up with a term because it's going to be a weird sex thing on Urban Dictionary.
Yeah. It sounds like it out of the gate without even thinking about it. It just sounds awful. Sure. And then a quick search, of course, confirms, obviously. But what was it's the hunter of
it's a egg hunter, Easter egg hunter.
There it is.
So
okay,
it
yeah.
makes sense in that respect. But
That's just no way to do it though.
So let's get back to IROC. Finish up really quickly.
Yes.
So IROC comes in. They're fighting with each other. They're listing. Pretty much, they're just going down the Wikipedia page for these Sword Quest games. And then he bests IROC. Our hero does. And after he has listed these facts and quoted Airplane and called him a crap burger, the crowd bursts into applause.
Yeah.
To which I just wrote, they did? The crowd who seemingly witnesses shit like this every day has then burst into applause at his besting of this doofus.
Yep, high school crap burger talk gets everyone really just like slow claps and cheering. And I love this. This was after that. He says, this is after this all happened, I believe. Gunters loved to play the game of one-upmanship and were constantly trying to prove they had acquired more obscure knowledge than everyone else. That would be like stopping the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan and having another character say, why are they shooting at us? Well, Germans invaded.
Sure.
They allied with the Axis powers and attacked America. It's like, what are you... We just witnessed this whole... you put together the whole scene to show that, and then he has a paragraph describing
shows and then tells. It is really bizarre.
Awful.
Well, yeah. So one thing I thought would be worth doing this is tracking Star Wars references. So I got 4 during this first 3 chapters. There was a reference to a Jedi building his first lightsaber. Down in the basement, this is a little winky thing that only the true fans are going to get, Mike. But he has a Revenge of the Jedi poster, which you'll know was the original name of Return of the Jedi until they changed it because that would not be in line with the ethos of a Jedi to get revenge.
Right.
He's stranded on the remote planet. Obviously, I mentioned that earlier, and then they argue about that direct to TV Ewok movie. So that was 4 by my count. But I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of the old Star Wars reference.
Yeah, I think they're going to be coming fast and furious, including, I noted, the one that I think a point hinges on, Endorians, right? Isn't he? I believe that Ake says that to needle him instead of calling. I noted that, like, oh, is that a thing? Okay. But then 2 sentences later, they were talking about who designed a 1982 video game, so I kind of lost, and my eyes glazed over.
You wouldn't be a good Gunter, Mike. That's one thing that is for sure.
One more thing. I know we have to go, but I wrote it down and I bolded it, so it must be important. At the end of chapter 3, or somewhere in the middle, where he's talking about who Ake is, and he's already described him. So again, this is in the middle of that. He talks about how he worked with him sometimes, though they were kind of rivals, and he says it usually consisted of watching cheesy 80s movies and TV shows here in his chat room. We also played a lot of video games. We're 3 chapters in, you son of a bitch. That's all this has been. It's like a bazooka of shit like this, and suddenly he's describing what it's going to be again. It's unbelievable.
Video games, you say? He's described his living situation to a Donkey Kong level. He's doing this, playing the video games within a virtual reality world where he plays video games. So
yeah,
it's
amazing.
Tell them what they told you, then tell them what they have. You're going to tell them, and then tell them that you like video games. And the saying goes.
Tell them what they're currently telling you too. Is the other.
All right. Well, the main question I had at the end of the chapter was, like I said, I was intrigued by the treasure hunt. And so my question is he going to be able to pull this off? Tying all these threads together. There's got to be some way that these pop culture things are going to turn into a treasure hunt. And so whether he pulls it off is going to be he must do something, right? I mean, people liked the book, but
yeah, I wondered about that. Should we guess at that? Like what it is? I mean, he's really hasn't gone into, he's just said it is something in the game, right? I don't think there's been an actual description of it other than in other games. He talked about little gold encrusted or diamond encrusted gold things that people won back in the old days. So I assume it's something like that. But obviously it's going to be something like, Rosebud. It's going to be the sled. He mentioned something at the beginning, and I don't know whether we should even speculate or.
Sure, if you want to. I don't really have any idea. The pool of things that he can pull all the clues and references from seems, as we discussed, infinite. So I don't have a I don't have a theory about where it's going at the moment.
Yeah, I don't. I just don't know if we should speculate, but we'll think about that. Maybe we'll do it next week.
Fans have a good question of asking, can they pull it off, and being wildly disappointed when it comes to popular entertainment things. Because that was pretty much from halfway through the first episode of Lost. It was going to be like, well, geez, how are they going to pull this off? And the answer was, well, they're not going to.
They're not, obviously, yes.
So that's what I'm thinking. I think that'll be the key for me, whether it's a entertaining yet bad read, or whether it's just sort of like bad in general, and I don't actually enjoy turning the pages.
Yeah, I suspect that the ending, and again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but why not speculate, is that it's going to be like, the worst episode of Twilight Zone when you're sick on the couch and you spend 22 and a half minutes, and then at the end, it's just like, oh, okay. I suspect it's going to be like that, but we shall see. Maybe it'll blow our minds.
All right. Well, I think that for the next episode, we're going to ask people to read through chapter 8. That's another 40 pages, and hopefully that takes us into some more turf, more of this world. Maybe we'll get to meet Artemis. Maybe we'll get to see her curvy Rubenesque figure in all its glory.
Ho ho ho! Ooh la la!
But yeah, I think listen to this and then take a stab at those next 40 pages through chapter 8 again, and we will read along with you, because I have not read any further in the book.
And if you've come this far, you'll know that 40 pages is a very easy read. This is not a tough assignment, people.
Not at all.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for
Conor.
listening. Thanks for getting in touch. Thanks for reading and reviewing, and we'll see you next time.
All right. So long, everyone.
Bye.